Hello and welcome to our third session in English from the INSTITUT MARQUÈS. This evening we're going to be talking about how to improve your chances of falling pregnant via IVF by means of lots of different techniques available in the laboratory. So I'm going to go through the different techniques that we have available here, and just to give you more detail so that when you, if you're interested in IVF, which is why you're probably logged in today, what you may use to actually improve your chances of success, because these techniques can significantly improve the chances of success for you. So if we start with something very simple, the egg. This is what will be collected from people who are doing IVF, from donors as well, if they do egg donation. It's an egg. You can see it's an egg. It's got a nice thick outer shell. Well, it's got a thick outer shell. It's an egg. How can we improve upon what we see under the microscope? What can we add in terms of technique to be able to look at this better to help us? Well, we can look at it through polarized light. And this is what the same egg might look like with polarized light. You can see that there's a circle. It's a very nice clear circle, and the thickness of that circle, somebody's saying they can't hear me, so hope people can hear me. The thickness of that circle indicates the maturity of the egg. That's useful to know because we want to do ICSI on mature eggs only. The little point at 12 o'clock tells us where the nucleus is. The nucleus is important to know because, again, for ICSI you don't want to hit the nucleus, you want to avoid it because you don't want to damage it. So this kind of technique is useful to try and tell us which eggs are very useful for ICSI, which ones should have ICSI applied, and where to do the ICSI. So we tend to recommend doing this in people who have very few eggs, where the eggs are particularly precious, and you just want to do absolutely everything you possibly can to try and make sure that everything goes well. So what can we do for the sperm? Well, the sperm, we can just put the sperm put the eggs in a bath of sperm, which is called just conventional IVF, and we can just put them there and wait until they fertilize. So a bath of about 100,000 sperm. Often that's enough to get quite a good fertilization rate, and that's the most natural way of doing it. However, if you're in your late 30s doing IVF, or if your husband or your partner has poor sperm quality, then it can be difficult for the sperm to naturally penetrate into the egg. The egg can have quite a thick shell if you're getting older, and the sperm, if it's not very good quality, can lack the enzymes in its head to be able to penetrate everything, to penetrate the shell. So what you're seeing on the image now is ICSI that I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's essentially where we take the egg. You can see there's a holder on the left, the circle in the middle is the egg, and you can see coming from the right is a little needle, and in that is a sperm. And that little sperm is being pushed into the egg, and we are sort of forcing fertilization. Now this technique is particularly useful for people who have a poor sperm quality or are older, but we tend to use it at Marquès pretty much in everyone, including egg donors, in egg donation cycles and so forth, because it maximizes the fertilization rate. When you've done IVF, when you've been through it all, it's so disappointing to have a really low fertilization rate. So this does maximize it, usually takes it to an average of about 70%. Fertilization rate, I mean, for the eggs. That would be average for our center with ICSI usually. How can we improve upon ICSI? Well, we can do something called IMSI. IMSI is the same as ICSI, but the M in the IMSI indicates increased magnification. We increase the magnification of the sperm. You can see it here on the ICSI images that the sperm is really, really tiny. With IMSI, they magnify again about another 6,000 to 8,000 times. And that's when they can really see what kind of quality each sperm has. So you can see on these images that the sperm is just being assessed. Each sperm is being assessed by the embryologist. This is a technique that we particularly recommend in cases where men have very high proportions of abnormal sperm. So that would mean more than about 96% abnormal form. So only 4% of their ejaculate sperm is genetically, is morphologically normal. Now that seems like a very small proportion of normal sperm, and it is quite a small proportion. So this is why we use this technique. As you can see, it's quite laborious. It's a long process. It takes the embryologist a long time, so we can't offer it currently for everyone. But in teratozoospermia, so high proportion of abnormal forms, this is what we would do. We also recommend it in people who have had a history of fertilization failure and people who've been doing treatments for a long time, and it can considerably increase their chances of having a good fertilization rate. So what else can we do? Well, we can look after the embryos once they are created, and all the embryos go into an incubator, and we have one incubator in particular that we really like, and this is an incubator that you put the embryos in on day one, well, as soon as they're created, you put them in and then you close the door and you leave them. You leave them there for 72 hours in a very constant environment of pH, temperature and light, and the embryos just get on with it. They do their own thing. They're in the perfect environment to reach their maximum potential. And so how do we know what's going on? Well, we take photographs of them. We take photographs of them every 20 minutes. And so we get a mini film. And you can see it here, and we'll go through it in a minute. This mini film is really useful for the embryologists. They really like to know exactly what's happening with an embryo because it changes relatively quickly, and if you only look once every 24 hours you can miss fundamental stages. So you can see here that we've got the embryo, it's being created, it's moving from 2 to 4 to 8 cells, it's then coming together to form a morula which looks a bit like a blackberry, and then it goes on to be a blastocyst. So this is the image of a very good quality embryo doing what it should do. We tend to recommend the use of embryoscope when people are going for a long culture. So if they're planning to do a blastocyst transfer, a day 5 transfer, or they're going for genetic analysis of the embryos, so again a day 5 transfer, the embryoscope really seems to help allow the embryos reach day 5, or as many as possibly can reach day 5. So increasingly that's when we recommend it, but everyone can use it, and this is something that could be used for people doing egg donation as well as people just doing IVF. When we look at these images, what exactly are we looking at? Well, what do we want to see? I'll show you a still which makes it a bit easier. What we really want to see when we look at these embryos is how many cells they're in. So on a certain day they should be in a certain number of cells. On day 2 they should be in 4 cells roughly. On day 3 they should be in about 8 cells. And then it sort of changes slightly and you make your way towards being a blastocyst, which is the day 5 embryo. These cells, this current embryo that you can see on the screen is a day 3 embryo. It's got nice, clear, a balanced look about it. It's symmetrical. It's got the right number of cells. The cells are all clear. There aren't any fragments in between the cells. So this embryo looks very good. And we would give this embryo a score on a scale of 1 to 10. Other centres will use different scoring systems. Some will use A's and B's and C's and D's. We tend to use 1 to 10. When you see an embryo with a low score, what can you do about it? Well, sometimes you can't do anything, but there are certain things that we can do to try and help the embryo development if it has a low score. One of these things is if you have a lot of fragments, so little bits of material at the bottom or around the embryo, you can actually take that away. And this is what happens in this current video you'll be able to see. This is fragment removal, and this helps the embryo because in taking away those tiny little fragments, you allow the rest of the cells to then be able to develop normally. They're given more space to actually expand properly. And in this way, you help to maximize their chances of actually going forward. So you can see, I hope on the image, that tiny little bits of fragment are going up into the little hoover, which is the needle coming in from the right. Another thing you can do, particularly in eggs from older women, is actually make a hole in the embryo. Why would we want to make a hole in the embryo? Well, an embryo, when it grows inside the shell of the egg of the woman. And so it grows until it's about 5 to 7 days old, and then it gets too big for that shell, and it has to break out of the shell so that it can implant properly. What we do with the assisted hatching, that's what it's called, is just make holes in the embryo shell to try to help it to be able to implant properly. And this is required in women who are older, because as we get older, we tend to have eggs with thicker shells. That's just what happens. It happens with everyone. So this is quite a nice illustration. If you can, I hope you can see the images of both what an embryo looks like and how it really is three-dimensional. You can see it being twisted there to be able to see that it really is a ball of cells. It's not a flat thing as it appears in so many of the other images that we've seen. So these are all morphological assessments of an embryo and the ways we can help an embryo to try and implant. But sometimes everything looks fine with an embryo, but we find out that the genetics, the chromosomes inside the embryo, just aren't normal. And as an example, these 4 embryos. I've been told they will come from the same patient, and you can see that based on the criteria that we mentioned earlier, they all look very good. They're in the right number of cells. They all look like they're on day 3. They're probably all in 8 cells. The cells are nice and clear. They're well balanced. It's symmetrical. There's no fragmentation. They all look great. However, only one of these is actually genetically normal. Embryo number 1 has trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. Embryo number 2 has trisomy 18, which is Edwards syndrome. And embryo number 4 has trisomy 18, trisomy X, and monosomy 4. That last embryo probably has about another day to live or so, because it just wouldn't be able to continue with those abnormalities. In this case, only this 3rd embryo is actually genetically normal. So why is this the case? Why can you sometimes get embryos that all look fabulous and they're not genetically normal? Well, this can happen quite a lot in a woman doing IVF with her own eggs as she gets towards her late 30s and maybe early 40s as well. As we get older, our cells, we all have 46 chromosomes, or most of us have 46 chromosomes in each of our cells. And in the sperm and in the eggs, in the ovaries and in the testes, these 46 chromosomes then divide into 2 daughter cells of 23 each. So if you imagine you get 23 in each egg, and that meets up with 23 in a sperm, you then get 46 for the embryo, and it goes forward. But as you get older, the division can become uneven. So you can get one daughter cell with 22 chromosomes and another daughter cell with 24, so that when it meets up with the sperm, you then have 45 chromosomes or 47. And that is increasingly common as you get older. And so we tend to recommend doing genetic testing particularly in women who are reaching their late 30s or in their early 40s and still wanting to use their own eggs. In egg donation, it also has a role. I know we're maybe not talking about egg donation, but it also has a role because it may be infertility can come from the male as well. So analysis of the embryos can be important in that case too. It's particularly useful to do these the genetic testing of the embryos if you had recurrent miscarriages, or if you have a really long history of infertility and you just have no idea why. It can be very useful. It can provide a lot of information. So this is something that we do on a regular basis. It's quite easy to do. In the next video that you'll be able to see, this is embryo biopsy. So what happens here is that they make a hole in the embryo when it's on day 3 of development, and they just take out one of the cells. So on day 3 they're in 8 cells, they take out 1, so they leave 7, and the embryo doesn't notice that it's had one of its cells taken away. It just keeps developing in the laboratory. And 48 hours later, so on day 5 of development, we have an embryo whose morphological characteristics we can assess. It should be at a blastocyst by that stage, pretty much. And also we have a complete chromosomal mapping of the embryo. So we know what pretty much all the usually all the chromosomes are, whether they're abnormal or not, and whether an embryo should be transferred or not. And the geneticists will advise us about that. You may wonder how common genetic abnormalities are. Well, in a woman, from our research here at IM, in a woman of about 40, you can estimate that about 78% of her embryos will be genetically abnormal. Now that's terribly high. It seems terribly high, and it seems that it's almost impossible to create a pregnancy, but you know, you've got 22% that might be normal, but what you need is to pick out and find the ones that are normal and preferentially transfer those. So this is what we do here, and it's very useful. We think it's a very useful technique. So we would recommend all of these techniques, and we would recommend doing all these, if it's possible, going to a centre that can offer all these techniques, because if you do, and they tend to be the bigger centres. The bigger centres often have embryologists with a great deal of experience. They have more techniques are available. They've got more experience using those particular techniques. So in general, the statistics are higher, they're better. So if you can do that, then that is what we would recommend for everyone. And of course, we can offer all of those things for you, and hope we would like to be able to help as many people as possible. I don't know if we have any questions. Do we have any questions? Oh, somebody can't hear anything. Not hearing you on the phone. No? On repeat implantation. There's someone who is requesting any advice on repeat implantation failure. Repeat implantation failure can be related to genetic abnormalities. So sometimes talking about these particular the particular abnormalities I've been talking about, the genetic assessment and so forth of the embryo can be really useful. But you also mentioned having a thin lining. A very thin lining can be related to the stimulation you as the patient are receiving. So sometimes you need a bit more stimulation in terms of estradiol, or in terms of, well, the IVF cycle that you're doing. It depends on which treatment you're doing. Sometimes endometrial biopsies can help to produce a better lining, that sort of thing. I don't think we have any more questions at the moment. If you have anything that you particularly would like to know about, please do contact us. Just send all your questions to the general email address here at IM. We'd be very happy to hear from you. We'll be very happy to answer your questions, your individual case, and take it from here. Okay. Thank you for your time.